Hi, I'm Philip Bloom and welcome to this, the glamour of life on the road. This is a motel room by the airport in Christchurch and I'm here to talk about this camera here, the Canon 5D Mark III. 3.5 years ago, two beautiful things came into our lives. This, the 5D Mark II, and the second one was Vincent Laforet. And together they brought us reverie. And it took the filmmaking world by storm because what it did, it showed us that we could use a DSLR to shoot video, full HD video, 35mm optics, for really a fraction of the cost of what we were used to. It was the beginning of a journey that many of us have been on, but a journey that has frustrated some of us as well because of the issues that the camera has with sound and some of the things like aliasing and moire. So we've been really wanting a Mark III to come out for quite some time. And this is it, the Mark III, and I've been lucky enough to shoot with it for the past few days in the North and South Island of New Zealand. One of the things I felt that the Mark II was lacking was really just the ability to get deep depth of field detail shots. We know just how amazing the Mark II is at these amazing close-ups of people and that ability to get shallow depth of field. But deep depth of field detail shots, it was never good for that. Aliasing, moire all over the place. And that was one of the things I really wanted to see, just how much better the Mark III was. So instead of looking at my ugly mug in this really quite dingy corner of my motel room, I'm going to cut to random beauty shots of both the North and South Island to break it up. There may be nothing to do with what I'm talking about, but it's far better than looking at this. So on my first day shooting with the camera, I did the most important test for me when it came to the image. I wanted to see the moire and aliasing issues, if any, and I wanted to see the detail and resolution. I wasn't expecting it to be as sharp as, say, a C300. I was hoping it would be as good as the hacked GH2, for example. Unfortunately, when I looked at the footage, it didn't look any sharper than the Mark II, not to my eyes anyway. And that was enormously disappointing. One thing though, I saw no moire and no aliasing in the shots that I did, and that was really lovely. In fine information on leaves and grass and stuff like that, there were no issues along those lines. So that was a breath of fresh air. But the actual detail just wasn't there. It felt really quite almost muddy. But then something happened. I took the footage into Premiere and I added a sharpening filter. And I never do this on my footage from the Mark II for a very simple reason. If you do it on the Mark II's footage, it makes it look worse because the image issues are there, the moire and the aliasing. If you're going to add a sharpen filter, it just makes everything turn to crap. But with the Mark III footage, suddenly it just went bing. And it was like, it's sharp. I can see leaves, I can see trees, I can see things in the distance which weren't there before I added the sharpening filter. And it looked natural. And that was amazing. I couldn't get my head around it. And what it seems is the anti-aliasing that goes on within the camera is so good that you can sharpen the footage and it doesn't add those issues. It actually works like sharpening should work. It brings the detail out of the image. And suddenly it was looking really lovely. Now obviously it would be so much better if you didn't have to add any post sharpening and it just sung straight off of the card like the C300 does or like the GH2 when it's been hacked. But it isn't a big step to do and it does make an enormous difference. So couple that with the lack of moire, the lack of aliasing, the audio features, suddenly the Mark II was no longer a camera I wanted to shoot with. The Mark III overtook it enormously. I don't know which are the best picture profiles to shoot with yet with the camera. I do know that Cine Style and the Marvel Cine do work with it. I don't know how well it responds to the actual chip. Not enough tests have been done. So I've simply been using Stu Maschwitz's Pro Lost settings, which I used for pretty much all my Mark II footage, which is sharpness off. Make sure your contrast is all the way off as well, and your saturation is down too. That sharpness off is key, and I've told you that sharpening in post does wonders to the footage, but please don't add sharpness in camera. I've done comparisons with adding sharpness in camera and adding the sharpness in post. It looks atrocious if you put the sharpness in the picture profile on the Mark III. Still, keep it off and do all your sharpening in post. Rolling shutter artifacts, well, they're still there. Absolutely, very obvious. Controlled movement. You've got to shoot handheld with the rig, otherwise it's just going to look like poo. Hasn't been fixed that much, to be honest with you. It's still very much there. The biggest issue apart from image for me with the DSLR and the 5D, in fact all of the Canon DSLRs, in fact all the DSLRs, every stills camera that shoots video has this issue. Sound sucks. The Mark III is the first DSLR that I've used which has really good audio capabilities. First off, we have a headphone jack. Yes, a headphone jack, which means we can monitor what we're recording, which means we're no longer recording sound blind, which is a terrible way to record sound. Secondly, we have meters on the screen which show us the levels and we're not overmodulating it, so we're getting nice clean levels. Thirdly, we can change the levels whilst recording, and that's wonderful. And the way you change levels, if you activate the silent mode on the camera, is simply by using the touch sensitive dial at the back. So there's no clicking if you're trying to change levels during an interview, which can be very distracting. You can just touch the actual pad at the back and change levels, and that's a really well thought out feature. So we're going to live view mode and pressing the Q button and scroll down to the manual audio, and if we try to change it here with the silent, it doesn't work. You have to use the top dial, but when you hit record and then select it, you can change your levels using the silent button. So these only come into effect once you hit record. Prior to that, you have to use the dial. But having these meters on screen, as you can see, means you can stop overmodding. You know you have sound there. A lovely, lovely feature. Bit quirky in its implementation that you can only use the silent mode when you hit record, and you have to use a different dial before you hit record. Once you get used to it, it's fine. One of the big improvements of the Mark III over the other Canon DSLRs is we can now record a single clip up to 29 minutes and 59 seconds. It won't cut out around 12 minutes. But it won't go to 30 minutes or more in one clip, and that is down to a very simple reason. EU tax rule, which classifies any camera that can shoot video in 30 minutes or more in a single clip as a video camera, and that means more import tax. So that has not changed. Two different recording formats. We have the all-I, which means each frame is compressed regardless of the frame before or after, or we have IPB, which takes into account the frames before and after. All-I is a much better way of recording, but it does take up more space on your card, and we can record up to around 90 megabits per second. It can be less than that. It really depends on how much is going on within the frame. And as you can see, we have time code. If I select it, we can have record runtime or we can have real time. The camera shoots 50p and 60p. I know a lot of people missed it on the 5D Mark II and hoping a firmware update would have come along with it. Of course, we've had it on every camera from the 7D to the 1D Mark IV to the 550D/T2i, etc. It's always been there. It's been a bit rubbish as far as I'm concerned because the wiring aliasing has been so atrocious because the amount of information that's been thrown away to get down to 720p. I've barely used it. It's definitely better on the Mark III. It's not perfect, and of course it doesn't look as good as the 1080 footage, but as 720 footage goes, it's a lot better than the other Canon DSLRs. Low light, is it any better than the Mark II? The Mark II, when it came along, was eye-opening for me in low light ability. Couple that with a 1.4 lens, and I was going out and shooting stuff at night time that I could never get away with other cameras and be that clean. But you still really couldn't push it that far, and even at 1600 it was a little bit too noisy. You can clean it up, but the Canon noise is not nice. As soon as you get the ISO up past, say, 1250 on the Mark II, it's really not attractive at all. So just how much better or worse is the Mark III when it came to low light? So I did a very simple test. I filmed myself in a previous hotel. This is about my 13th or 14th hotel in the past month. I completely lost track. Don't ever ask me what room number I'm in because I never have a clue. I just a big blur of hotel rooms. Anyway, I filmed myself in the previous hotel room on the Mark II and on the Mark III using the same lens, which was a 50mm Canon, starting at f1.2 and closing down to get exposure, the higher the ISO went up. I started at 1600 ISO. And moved up to 3200 ISO. Then 6400 ISO. And you can go higher on the Mark II by using the H1 setting, which is essentially 12,800. And it doesn't look good. We know it doesn't look good. It doesn't like being pushed that far. But just how much better was the Mark III? This was key for me. This needed to be a big improvement. And you know what? It bloody well was a big improvement. At 1600, it looked good, looked clean, totally usable. At 3200, it's still really excellent. Even at 6400, I was amazed at the amount of noise in the underexposed areas, in the dark areas. On my face, it didn't matter so much because it looks fine across most of the ISOs. It's in the dark areas you need to look in the shadows and see how much noise is going on there. And at the highest ISO setting in video mode, which is 12,800, yeah, it's noisy, but I'll tell you something, it's a hell of a lot better than the Mark II. And in certain situations, you'd use it. As a documentary filmmaker, I need the ability to shoot in low light if I need to. And I have it with this camera. It's much, much better, much, much cleaner. A couple of minor quirks. I'm so used to having the focus check button on the top right-hand corner of the camera that's now moved to the left-hand side. Don't really see much point in that, but you can program the set button in the middle of the dial to replicate that, which is a more convenient place for it. The other thing I really would love to have had with this camera is simply a flip-out screen. Now, of course, on professional shoots, you're using monitors, you're using things like the Zacuto EVF, things which help you get your focus in awkward positions because the back screen is really just flat. But having a flip-out screen like the 60D has or the 600D has would help me enormously. I understand they didn't put it in because of weather sealing potential issues. I still would love to have had it there. If I want to be picky, and I'm going to be picky, why is there no peaking on the LCD screen at the back? Because it's actually really quite difficult to get focus at times. The only way you can do it is using that punch in, and that only works before you hit record. Peaking isn't that big a deal to add in there. I really wish it had it. The 5D Mark II, when you hit record, dropped to 480p through the HDMI out. Utterly useless when trying to go through any sort of video system or a video village. The Mark III does maintain the HD signal, but it is not clean, so using an external recorder to get past the compression internally is a no-no. Can it be fixed with firmware upgrades? Don't know. I hope so. I'm sure those magic lantern wizards are at it right now. So if you're a Mark II user and you want to know whether you should sell it and buy a Mark III, I would say absolutely. The moire in aliasing is pretty much gone, especially compared to what we were suffering with the Mark II. The low light is immensely improved. The resolution out of the card into the computer is the same, more or less, but you can sharpen it in post really quite easily, and then it just sings. And of course audio. Audio is a massive improvement. That in itself makes it a worthy upgrade. Is it 3.5 years of evolution better than the Mark II? Yes and no. The problem is I've been spoiled. I've got a C300, I have an F3 and FS100, and they all are amazingly good detail and low light and other features like that. But they're video cameras, they have no stills mode. So when it comes to comparative DSLRs, how does it compare to those, the newer models? Well, I've not had a chance to shoot with the D800 or the D4, so I don't know. I'm hoping to get my hands on them very soon, and hopefully by the time you've watched this, I may well have had my hands on them. But all I can talk about is what I've currently used. And the only camera that really has detail that is a stills camera with video mode is the GH2 hacked. And the problem with that is it is hacked, which means you need fast cards to deal with that very high bit rate. And that's really the best thing it does, because it's not very good in low light at all. It has a very baked in look. You can't get a very broad dynamic range. It's very good at what it does, high detail shots, but with that half size of the 5D Mark II sensor, the Micro Four Thirds, all your lenses field of view is going to be effectively double. So it's not a perfect camera, it's a very nice low budget alternative. So it isn't perfect. There's lots of things I would love this camera to have, which it doesn't have, and that's always going to be the case. Some key things would simply be clean HDMI out, which both the Nikon D800 and D4 have. I know there's a market to protect with the C300, but I do believe they are completely different cameras, completely different markets, completely different tools, and it's a real shame that we don't have the clean HDMI out of the 5D Mark III. I do hope a firmware upgrade will come for that, because it seems really peculiar to have the competition having such a key feature and this one not having that. The rolling shutter artifacts are still really quite poor, and I really wish we had a much bigger improvement than we currently have. And of course the resolution, it would be so much nicer not to have to sharpen it in post, wouldn't it? Just straight out the camera, nice and sharp. I am much happier with it today than I was a few days ago. A few days ago I was just like, oh god, what a disappointment. After shooting with it and dealing with it in post and seeing how good it is in low light and seeing how much detail I get off that sensor and how little marine aliasing there is there, for me it is a big step up from the Mark II. And it's the full frame which makes me want to shoot with this camera at times over, say, a C300 or an F3. And of course the size itself, it's tiny, you can get away with a lot filming one of these, but that full frame aesthetic, it's unique. The sensor size of the C300 and those other cameras, Super 35, which is more or less the same as the APS-C, and it's a totally different look. I love that full frame look, and to have a camera that has that full frame look without those really nasty image issues, for me, it's really lovely to have it back.